Hello guys, welcome to the Merge meetup at UX Spin Space. Our topic today is psychology and design. My name is Rita Corona, and today with me we have Marika, we have Nicole and Adam, and also Arjun Saxena, who is co-hosting this event with me. We would like you to be active, so basically whatever will trigger your curiosity or you will have some comment to say, just keep that in mind. We will have breaks for questions from the audience, and also after 1 hour we will have a possibility for you to interact with our guests and basically satisfy your curiosity more. This is the main concept of this being a learning space for you. This is our main producer, Mac Akhtar from UX Spin team, and yeah, we will be starting in a moment. Okay, so let's maybe start from short introductions. Okay. Marika, could you ask a bit more?
So my name's Marika. I'm the Director of Research at User Testing. We actually were founded in Mountain View, still have a small office in Mountain View, but also San Francisco and Atlanta. We're doing something interesting with our research team. So I lead our research team, but it's UX researchers and data scientists. And so we work super closely together to solve problems for our teams. I studied psychology, kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do with myself. Thought maybe the clinical side. I was definitely interested in like how the brain works and researching how people think and how people work. Thought maybe clinical, then was like I should just do research. I'm good at doing research, so I applied for a PhD program. Was not a good fit, wasn't fast-paced enough. I wanted to like make an impact. And I remember in grad school over 10 years ago reading a job description for a UX researcher position at Google. And being like, oh my God, this is it. Like I get to like study the human mind, I get to study people, I get to apply psychology, but I get to do it in a much faster paced environment. And so I left my grad school program with a master's degree and have been UX research consultant, UX researcher, and now manager leading a team. And super excited to talk about psychology and why that is important.
Great. And could you tell a bit more about the company that you're working with?
Of course, yes. Sorry, I know. I assume that everyone knows user testing, but that's... So we help companies do their own user research more quickly by connecting them to their users and potential users. So if you think of a survey company, you can send out a survey to a panel. We have a panel of people, but instead of just getting a list of questions answered and back and graphs and stuff, we actually have people record those experiences, and so you get videos back of people using your app or website, or just a conversation, like just an interview. And because we have a panel across the world, you get to talk to people anywhere. And so especially, I'm sure this will come up talking about sort of psychology and how we think, but like if we only did research in our bubble in the Bay Area, we keep designing for like people here. But by doing remote research, you get to talk to people everywhere and hear different perspectives and just build that empathy with your users. And so my job gets super meta because I spend all day researching how people do research. And then like taking notes on what they're doing that I want to apply to my team versus improving our product. But it's great. I love it.
Great. Thank you. Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm currently a research manager at LinkedIn. I started my research career earlier at Mattel, so I was a researcher at Mattel Toys for 10 years. Prior to that, I also started in psychology. I thought I would be a child psychologist, so I got my master's in marriage and family therapy, started doing all of my hours, working with kids, doing kids groups, and realized this is not for me. And my poor family was like, wait, what? You're not going to do this after we just put you through master's program? I'm like, no, I'm over this. But I knew I wanted to do something, to your point, with children, understanding how they behave and why. But I didn't necessarily want to hear negative, terrible, horrifying stories every day. So I went to Mattel Toys and figured should be all happy things there. And did the research there with children and parents for 10 years. And then at LinkedIn, I have been working on a variety parts of the experiences. So I started off with helping onboarding new members into the experience. I worked on the profile to help them understand how users feel about adding stuff to their profile photo and whatnot. And now I'm currently on the careers team and helping our members find their next opportunity.
Great, thank you. Adam?
Hello, my name is Adam Ruff, and I am a product designer at AngelList on the venture team. I'll talk a little bit more about AngelList in a minute. I want to follow suit and just talk about my psychology connection. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Minnesota. There I was really interested in social psychology and also something called IO, or industrial and organizational psychology. I'm really fascinated with work, people doing work. So when I moved to the Bay Area in 2008 and found out that there is a job where I can influence people's behavior at work and make work better, that sounded like an awesome fit. So since 2008, 2009, I've been working with startups, medium-sized companies, large-sized companies in this role of, I think in 2019, the title is product designer. I think it can be also UX UI designer, something like that. Those titles are kind of fluid. And yeah, super excited to be on the panel today and talk a little bit about psychology and design. Going back to AngelList. AngelList is a platform for startups. The team that I work on is the venture team, so we're working on products for people who are investing in startups and people who are bringing deals to invest in startups and get them funded. Some of the interesting projects that I'm working on now are supporting a design system, which is really cool, and doing a lot of revamp work, taking some products that get the job done, not in the most elegant or efficient way, and looking at optimizing those and making those experiences better for users.
Great, thank you very much. So I will also tell you a bit about my background. I have master's in psychology, but I did my studies in Poland, and Poland where also a UX spin was born, so we have a lot of sentiment towards that. I almost became a therapist, but what fascinated me is that psychology can be widely applied in a workplace. So I spent the last 12 years working with product teams or project teams on their performance and development of their skills. So this is a lot of organizational psychology, but also ability to understand what individuals and teams need to be better at what they are doing, right? And what makes a team deliver an amazing product. So this is my passion topic, and also Arjun is working currently with me on Product Dojo, where we basically create a space for product teams to excel and grow. Arjun, could you introduce yourself also?
Sure. So I'm Arjun Saxena. I've been a product manager for a long time in the Bay Area in different companies, computer science background, and currently I'm co-founder of a machine learning startup. But our passion project with Connects with Aditya is creating this learning community of people in transition, especially those wanting to get into product roles from related roles.
Okay, and the more I'm excited to have 3 psychologists who are also product experts. It's a huge pleasure to be with you guys. And we have 4 topics, so we will circle around them. You've seen them on the event site. So just to summarize, we have ethical and unethical usage of psychology in design, positive reinforcement in UX, optimizing interfaces with our understanding of the human mind, and emotional and mindful design. So starting from the first one, which is pretty controversial, we started a small chat about it during the break, about ethical and unethical. So what are your experiences of ethical design?
Do I go because I have the mic? All right. I can talk a little bit about experiences. I think when we think about, I'll try to present it in both unethical and kind of ethical solutions. So some of the things that I think we're thinking about at AngelList, not necessarily on the venture team, would be things like addictive loops, right? Like people spending so much time, more time than they even realize they want to, or spending too much time. Maybe they're searching for something and we're not doing enough on the data side or the product side to actually just connect them with that thing that they're looking for, and so they're spending so much time searching for it. So being very conscious of the time that people are spending with the products we're building, I think is kind of a big ethical topic. There are a couple other things. At Twitch, one of the things that I think continues to be a challenge is how do you create a safe place? How do you create a place that you let people be themselves and freely express themselves and have a safe place? At Twitch, some of the things that we built were things like auto moderation, so you could filter out specific words to try to prevent kind of common things that people want to avoid. Harassment on a bunch of different levels, like no one wants to go to a place and feel harassed. So those are a couple kind of key topics that I've had experience thinking about with some of the products. How about you?
Sure. I can give you an example of not thinking, I guess it's thinking of the bad actor. So I work at LinkedIn, and that is a place where, you know, we are allowing our members to have a profile and connect with other professionals. And we didn't necessarily think about the consequences of that. What are some unethical things that could happen that were out of our control, right? What could our members be doing that could be unethical? So we're really trying to be more cognizant of what could be happening without that wasn't our intention. Perfect example, dating. So you would think it's a professional networking site. Some people think, oh, networking professional, I would love to find a partner that's a professional that has a great career. And they will start emailing people like, hey, I saw your profile photo, you look really cute, want to go on a date? Not our intention whatsoever. So, you know, it's just, we have to keep in mind of all the things when you do build something, what are the unintended consequences of what you create, right? So it's just something that we're kind of mindful of. And a random, not LinkedIn example, I don't know if any of you play games on your app, right? Maybe one or two of you. There's also some kind of, you know, what about like a financial ethical responsibility? Some of those games or things where they kind of tease you with a little like, just give me 99 cents and you can get to the next level, or, you know, it will give you a little benefit. Some people might, maybe even like Vegas, get super addicted to that, and it could potentially put an economic strain on your users. So just different ways that you could think about how whatever you're making could actually impact them in a more negative way, I guess.
Yeah, and since I mentioned how meta my job gets, when I think of ethics and psychology, I think a lot about participant recruitment and how we treat like the users that we interview and talk to. And then at user testing, that means our panel of participants as well. And so like I spent a lot of time in my career thinking about how you like fairly ask questions and how you sort of make sure that people feel comfortable when they're giving you feedback. Also because you want unbiased feedback, which we can talk more about the biases in what you hear from your customers. But there's like a whole host, there's no IRB, like a board that makes sure that participants in research are treated fairly and ethically, but it's something to keep in mind when you're talking to your customer, make sure that they feel like it's a safe place to give feedback. And then for our participants in our panel, it's kind of the same, like unintended, like I feel like we could have been more intentional. We have a lot of systems in place to think about the tester experience, like what does it mean to be on the panel and record those experiences, but customers, because as a customer you can set up a test and ask testers to do anything, like literally anything. It's like we want you to, we've had tests taken in cars like while you're driving. It's like super dangerous. Like you should not be on your phone while you're driving no matter what. We also don't want to encourage that behavior, and so there's this like balance and trade-off of like it's not one of the things we have control over, but it's how our platform is used. Testers know that they have the ability to say no. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to answer questions they don't want to ask. Like people ask questions, and it's like we get into even questions like a lot of people want to use user testing for accessibility research. Like obviously super important to make sure that your design is available to everyone, can be used by everyone no matter what their abilities are. But people with a disability don't always want to tell you that they have a disability. And so there are platforms and companies to use for this kind of research, but even just asking that question, like, is that ethical? I don't have an answer to it, but it's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with and thinking about.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any good practice how the ethical part can be a part of the process of designing and even researching users?
Yeah. for us, like I think B2B versus B2C is really interesting difference too. Like obviously, even in a business setting and software that's meant for people to be used at work, we can make it addictive. There's a little bit less of the conversation of sort of like, that's not really how we make our money. We want like the managers and executives at companies to buy a subscription to ours. So we're not thinking about the little sort of like design things we can do to sort of nudge people in a direction that they spend more money or buy more things. Like but there's still the same kinds of like in our practice. Like, are we actually encouraging people to do the things that match, like that help them? I think that's kind of what you were saying, Adam. It's like people have a desire to do something. We're trying to help them at work, and are we actually are we thinking about their needs versus what we want to build or what we want to do? And we have sort of our own checks in place where it's like, let's make sure that we understand the underlying needs, we understand that problem, and that we actually have solved that problem. And my team helps the product managers and designers and engineers with that.
Yeah, I was just thinking that also for us, we also think like if you're picking a certain user or audience, and you think we're going to build a great product for this type of user, you also have to think about who are you excluding by focusing on them. And that's something we're always trying to be mindful of. So, you know, it might be like, well, we have a lot of jobs for, let's hypothetically say, engineers in the Bay Area. So let's, you know, double down on that. It's like, okay, but if we do that, then who is missing out? Who's not getting as many opportunities as, you know, if we didn't focus on them? So just always trying to think of who you're excluding when you're focusing or building for someone.
And I'll just take it back to accessibility real quick, because that's something super actionable that you can do at the like UI level. That's something that at AngelList right now we're actually baking into our new design system. So previously, like if you look at some of the AngelList pages today, you'll find issues with like low contrast, text that's too small, hard to read, things like that. Maybe we don't have labels set up so that screen readers will have an easy time with it. So baking that into the design system and just making that as part of the requirements. One little thing that we do is we have a designer checklist that we actually go through and say like, cool, did we do this? Did we think about accessibility? Did we think about, you know, some of those other cases, like who are we designing this for? Who are we not designing it for? What are the consequences? And being able to justify that so that you just build that in as a habit of how you do design work.
Okay. Questions from you?
So you had mentioned that, are you able to hear me? Okay. So you had mentioned that sometimes you have to think about like the financial responsibility, so not doing like charging extra maybe for a small feature, or like you mentioned addictive loops. So a lot of these decisions are based on what the business model is like, and you know what the higher ups or the stakeholders decide. So then how do you kind of convince them that you know these are maybe potential dark patterns and
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think as a researcher, I'm not the D, right? Like I'm not going to be the final say. Personally, I feel like I'm the seed planter. That's how I think of myself. I have information, I am the voice of our members, and I hear and I'm, you know, constantly thinking about them, their their psyche, like are they safe, you know, all these things. And then I plant the seeds. I'm not saying you must do this, but I think, you know, how might we think about this? You know, what are the outcomes if this should happen? And just always being, I think as a researcher, and probably as a designer as well, you're always kind of just the reminder. Or, I don't want to say you're the parent, but you're kind of like the parents of like, don't forget to eat your broccoli. Like, it's just those little things that start, once you start planting those seeds, it will, I don't really need this, I guess. It will start making the team start thinking of it naturally on their own. But you just have to start making that a mental muscle. And so you just keep saying it over and over and over. How might we think about it differently? Or what might happen if we do it this way? I'm sure they're tired of me saying that, but it's funny when you start hearing them parrot back those things, you're like, oh, it's working. So I think, yeah, you just keep reiterating it.
So questions are also kind of tool that you can
Yes, and that's the
consciously-
psychology part.
Right. Any other question from you at the moment? Okay, so we can always.
How do you think of paywalls when you think? Do you think paywalls are ethical or unethical? Especially on AngelList, like I'm on AngelList a lot, and there are certain things I want to do, but I have to pay for that. How do you see it as an ethical dilemma or no?
So I'm not working on those particular products, so I can't address specifically what the team is thinking. about those, but in general, like if you're just asking my personal view on things, I think that paywalls can be used effectively in an ethical way. For example, I'll talk about something that I'm just thinking about in the back of my head as all this is going on. At AngelList, we're working on a submission to participate and host an event for SF Design Week. And one of the things that SF Design Week recommends is a minimum $10 ticket fee. And they say if you charge a little bit of money, it helps people like commit, they're more invested, they're gonna show up, they're gonna participate, because really a lot of the value of the event is people showing up and being there and that experience. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're taking that ticket money and we say, okay, we're gonna donate it. So we've picked a charity and we're gonna give all of the ticket sales to donations. So I think there are opportunities to do things like that. Not saying that like every paywall is gonna be donated, but you can think about, how are you using them? Are you using them to make sure that people are committed? Are there alternatives to the paywall? Those are kinds of questions that you might ask.
Thank you, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jumping to the next topic that we have, positive reinforcement in UX. First of all, let's start off from explaining what is positive reinforcement.
Sure. I mean, my interpretation is it's a give and take, right? So we ask our members for something, then the nice thing to do is to give them something in return. And then you'll positively reinforce them to do it again or give you more information so that, so like an example, profile. When I was originally on the profile team, when you were setting up your profile, it would say, list your school, list your current title, years of experience, yada, yada, yada. And then we often heard people say, well, I know I need to set up my profile, I know I need to complete it more, but I don't have time, or I really don't know what it's going to do for me, or why you even ask me this information, right? And so we did a lot of research to understand, like, okay, well, what if I told you that if you tell me your school, then I can tell you, hey, there is, 800 other people at that school here that you might know that could connect you to an opportunity, or might know someone that you know, or things like that. Oh, well, that sounds good. I guess I could give you my school for that. So then we realized, okay, well, we need to be a little more transparent. We need to start telling you why we want this information and what would be the reward you would get. So literally, it's just like we ask you for your salary, which is a new thing that we're doing, and you might be like, well, LinkedIn, what are you going to do with my salary? Like, who are you telling that to? Which is another conversation, right? And what are you going to do with that? And then it's like, okay, if you give us your salary information, then we're going to start aggregating that information and tell you how you fit in the range of salaries in the area that you live in. So then that's a little more motivating for someone to give you a salary. It's like, okay, so I'll know if I'm making enough, the average or below. And so it's just a way to kind of help them understand. That's a good way of doing it, I think, in my opinion.
Would you like to add something to this definition?
Yeah, I'll just add on. You can also use emotions and fun as positive reinforcement. So at Brightroll and Yahoo, one of the features that I worked on as a hack project was creating a really simple feedback form to solicit feedback from users. This was an enterprise platform, so not a ton of users, but people that were using the product every single day for hours each day. And my little kind of hack was create this form, and then when they fill it out, show them a puppy. People love puppies. It's a fact. And yeah, it was great. Like, we got so much more feedback through that channel than any of the other channels. It was, within the small scope of the amount of feedback we were getting, it was wildly successful in terms of collecting feedback. But for me, the one thing that I'll always remember is going to check on the feedback and seeing someone who wrote in, I just wanted to see a puppy. I really needed to see a puppy. Thank you.
That example is great. We think about this stuff and talk about it, but then in a business context and sort of like what's the equivalent of that. But I really love all the conversations about designing for delight and what is delight, and I think that is just a way to reinforce the behavior that you want your customers to have? Like, how do you make them feel good about what they're doing, and also like make them want to come back in a like positive way? Like you create an experience that makes them also accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, make them feel good. And what does that mean in different like kinds of apps, like whatever you're working on? And it's I wouldn't say harder. You can't put puppies in a product that works for work. Although I think is it Asana that has the unicorns that like fly across the screen? So I mean, it's possible. I think there's also a lot to do with words. So less like imagery is super important, and we do stuff with like iconography and imagery. But even just the words, and that is super hard. I've spent a lot of years researching like writing for the web, and how do you like writing in clear, so plain English or whatever language you're designing in, but how do you make things understandable? But even just there, the like reinforcement, like do people know that they did the right thing, and do they know what to do and where to go? And I think words are super powerful in that.
I have like a flip side to the positive rewards, which is the negative outcome of what could happen. So I'm an avid Peloton bike rider. I don't know if any of you know Peloton. It's amazing. They don't give me money or anything, but it's amazing. And I am motivated to do it because they give me badges. So if I complete a certain amount of miles, I get a badge. And I'm super internally competitive with myself. So I love those damn badges. But then I actually got to think, like, it's a miles per, like, how many miles can I get, and I get a badge. Then I'm starting to think, like, what about those people who need to get on the bike for health reasons, and it's really hard to get on the bike, and maybe do 1 mile is like super good for them. They're not getting a badge, right? So then I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I should feel so good about my badge, because there's people that are doing the exact same thing I'm doing, and they're not getting any kind of accolades, right? They're not getting any high fives, like, ooh, you did good, you did 100 rides, you know? So I'm just thinking, like, when you think of those rewards, again, like, is there a reward you can give everyone on the spectrum, right?
Can I say something about that?
Sure.
So, since you studied child psychology, one of the things that is going on is probably you already guessed what I'm going to say, which I suspect. You know, when you reward somebody unnecessarily, you kill the actual reward, right? So how do you mitigate that? Like, I think reward should need to have some kind of a basis. It's like the kids going to a soccer match, and even the losers get some kind of a trophy, you know. So what do you think about that?
I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. I think it's just being mindful of all of the different outcomes. I think that's a starting point, at least. So if you know, like, if you want to do a badge or a reward of some sort, you know, how is that impacting everyone that's your users? Is there other ways that you can have similar types of rewards for people? Or how do you motivate those that aren't going to get a reward? You know, how do you, to your point, what's the context or the content that you could say, the words you could say to be motivating, to be like, great job, or, you know, you know what I mean? Like, not necessarily giving them the trophy, but giving them something to be motivated to continue, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's also a part in like, I think what you want is more intrinsic motivation. Like, we want people to do like the thing on their own, and that like really comes down to product market fit. Like, do you have a product and there's people who need that product? It's not always that easy, where it's like, yeah, we have a product, we're also trying to run a business, and there's certain things that make us make money, and how do we get them to do those things that make us money, but then also get that motivation? And so I understand, like, to me, the ideal world is like you only solve real problems that people have that they'll spend money on, and you make money and they solve their problems. It's just not always that easy. And so I do think in design you have to nudge people sometimes in a certain direction, and you can use positive reinforcement to do that. There's also other techniques to do that.
I would also add from the psychological standpoint that basically positive reinforcement is part of behavioral sciences. So in this approach, and it's like a huge part of psychology that is dedicated to understanding this, is that every experience, every situation can be either encouraging to do certain things or discouraging, or can be neutral. So whenever we are designing something, whether it's a dinner for friends or a birthday party or a product, we should be mindful what the participants or users are experiencing and what maintains their engagement and what discourages them, right? And checking whether it's the way it should go, like the way we intend to do, or it's going the opposite way, right? So yeah, that's it. Questions from you guys?
So I have a question in regards to, so you're trying to be mindful of all of the participants. What if is one participant is actually, if you do positive reinforcement, actually generate growth for them, but it actually degenerate growth for another participant? How do you handle that? Do you actually just go with the majority or another solution? I'm just curious.
For us, that's a balance kind of to the earlier question on the business priorities. And absolutely, like you make design and product decisions based on one segment, and like this will cause this behavior to happen, and we'll see this. One of the benefits for my team of working with data science is that we have that connection to like the actual metrics like embedded, and also the team where we understand, we do the customer interview, so we understand why the behavior that we're seeing is that way. But if we're trying to drive a certain business metric, even knowing that that might negatively impact another group is super important. And that, like, I also agree is not like my team to decide, but we can show like, if we do this, we think it'll negatively impact this group, and maybe that's okay. Like, but it has to be a business decision.
Yeah. And unfortunately it does happen, right? Like there are business decisions, and there's times where I've done research and I'm like, oh, but if you just worked with these folks over here, it'd be so great for them. But at this quarter, at this stage of development, we're going this direction. And I understand that. And it's hard, I think, as researchers to hear where your users are and know where your product is headed. And you know, sometimes, okay, backstory. When I worked after Mattel, before LinkedIn, I worked at Belkin, which is, they did wireless routers and things of that nature. And our users would ask for things that technology literally could not deliver on. Like, you know, I want to walk down the street, my phone charged in my pocket. And I'm like, I hear you. Product. Can you make this happen? So there's always going to be times where you feel in your heart, we need to be doing something different for someone else. And at that point of time, you need to kind of just say it and be like, okay, great, we'll go this direction, but keep in mind, these people also would really benefit if we did X, Y, and Z. And maybe you can bring that up at the next planning cycle or strategy cycle to be like, hey, we didn't have time, or we weren't focused on this last quarter. Could we consider it this quarter now? And then you guys be the ones to remind them, because sometimes product does have a very specific thing and they forget about all the things that research and design said were like, what about this? So I think just being the reminder of like, what about next quarter? Can we go there? Things like that.
Super interesting situation for us now is the difference, and I'm sure like lots of companies have this distinction, but it's buyers versus users, and sort of what our users need and want, and like how do we reinforce the behavior we want to see in our users that drives engagement in the product. But buyers have really different needs, and we're not touching them the same way in the product. And so like our communication tool, you know, like on the design team and product team is really different to the buyers. And my team has spent very little time researching buyers, but it's such an interesting, like I feel like that's also where sometimes the dichotomy is sort of like what behavior we're driving revenue. Like we all want the company to make more money. And so there's the buyer's needs and what are they doing? What information do they need? Like what, how do we communicate to them? And then how do we communicate in the product?
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add in, I think something Nicole mentioned previously is like there's a couple different things you can do as well. Like you can design solutions for all of the people. For example, when I was at Twitch, we identified kind of 3 intrinsic motivators for people who stream, which was fame, love, and money. And sometimes they had, you know, 1 or more of those intrinsic motivators, but we were very clear on those intrinsic motivators. And so when we released products like achievements and things that are like badges and things that support, we can look at, okay, cool, how many of these are supporting people who are focused, who are driven by this intrinsic motivator versus that one. So if you have it works better if you have a small group, right? Small number of people to serve, but you can look at serving multiple folks. Also, I think to the point that Nicole's making of like championing for groups. Like if you really care about supporting a specific group of people. Oftentimes it's just a little bit of legwork. Sometimes it's looking at the data. I'm looking for data to convince the business or persuade the business that it's very valuable actually to invest in solving these specific problems for the group of people. And sometimes that just needs a champion.
Okay. So there will be also space for more questions around that. Now going forward to to our next topic, mindfulness and design, and what designers should be mindful of in terms of listening and creating and thinking for users, for people. How much psychology do you need to know to be good at designing and optimizing for human mind?
Do we have time for it? It's such a loaded question.
Yeah, it's okay.
I don't think you have to have studied psychology. Obviously, we're here for a reason to talk about it, but I don't like that, absolutely not. I actually really like that in UX. There's so many people that come at it from different perspectives and different backgrounds. We were talking before this about like how do you hire researchers and what do you look for. I do always look for people who are interested in people, and it's been especially interesting hiring data scientists because they're interested in data and math, which is awesome, but we specifically want data scientists who are interested in the people that represent those data points. And I think that's, like, it's not even so much how much psychology do you know, but it's that, like, I want to find out and understand, because to me, that's the, like, you actually care about the users you're designing for, and that's so much more important. And, like, I think we have a section to share, like, our favorite blog posts and like, books and stuff like that. There's, like, amazing courses, but even just, like, a course or reading some stuff to kind of have a better sense. The thing that's helpful to know is there's some just, like, basic psychology principles, and it's really, like, limitations of our mind that are really important to know for designers and anyone building stuff. There's like certain things we as like our human brain can't process too much information at the same time, or we're like hard to focus attention in lots of places. Like we can get into some of these examples. I think that's like important and helpful to know, but you can read about that or you can like listen to a podcast. It's that like I care, I want to find out and learn about people, no matter specifically what your role is on the like design team. I think it's super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what concepts are especially useful for designers from your perspective?
There's so many concepts that I think are really useful for designers, especially on the UI side. So there's a whole host of like heuristics, like recognition. You know, does this thing look like the icon that people recognize it? There's a lot of things that if you read about them or learn about them, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's common sense. I think that's basically what heuristics are all about, is these shortcuts and how we process things quickly. There's also quite a bit on the sensation and perception side, ranging from all the visual stuff from contrast to colors and those kinds of things, now to a lot more like audio and speech UI. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No.
I think the like attention one that I always like is if people have to remember information from one screen to the next or one page to the next, like that's a huge one where like I find myself using products where like I'm required to remember. If you think of comparing products or filling in information, and I like need like multiple tabs or windows, like when I try to split screen, I'm like something's broken in this. I think that like knowing that that's not like that's a problem we as designers, in the broadest sense of designers, need to overcome. It's like not like we're not going to train people to like expand their memory, and it's something that like knowing that also I think gives like as a design, like this is a really hard problem, but we can help people with that and we can keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's to your point, the heuristics. I think I don't know, it might be hard for design, but as a researcher, it's kind of part of those things that you're like checking off, right? Like you watching someone go through a flow and you're asking them, you know, what would you expect to happen next? That's where you hear what's broken, right? When they are thinking something's gonna happen or should happen, and that's not what we designed to do. And they get there and they stop. It's when they stop the process and they have to think, that's when things kind of, that's your red flag. When they're like, oh, And I'm like, oh, what does that mean? My favorite thing to ask users is to think out loud, which is to talk your thoughts. Because I literally will do that. They're like, oh, and I'm like, what does that oh mean? I'm like, well, I did not expect that to happen. I expected it to do this. I'm like, great, expect that to happen. And it's even little things like consistency, you know? Like I work on the jobs tab. So if they're looking at a job, like a list of jobs over and over, and they're like, why is this not the same on every job? I'm like, oh, do you think it should be the same on every job? Yes, I am expecting to see salary here every time. Why do I have to search for it on this page? So it's little things like that, that when you're caught up in the moment of you've got a deadline and you've got to make this feature and, you know, make sure it gets to engineering in time, and you have all these things that are kind of getting you to go really fast, it's hard to stop and be like, does this even make sense? Like, is this what the user would actually think would happen? So it's just those little things like consistency, and privacy is a huge one on LinkedIn. It's a huge issue that we're constantly trying to figure out, because the experiences, as you, if any of you are LinkedIn members know, it's different on every page. So some pages, like on the feed, it's all public. Anyone can see what you say there. But your profile, a lot of it's private. Some things are public, some things are private. So that's a heuristic that is something that we really internally are struggling with, is to understand, like, at what point in the process does it need to be consistent? Do we need to have privacy across the board all the same? Can we make it different in different places? And if we do make it different in every place, how are we communicating to the user so they don't stop and question? You know, you don't want to stop and be like, wait, is my profile visible or not visible right now? So that's kind of something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I like, we think a lot about like limitations of people's memory and what they like remember from the past. We as humans have a really bad time remembering exactly what happened. There's a lot of like research and like witness testimony that shows that people just have incorrect memories of what happened, depending on what you focus your attention on in the moment. Like, I have no idea if the man who's the back before had a green shirt on, now a blue shirt. Like, it's like because there's so much information in the world, we can't process all of it at the same time, and so we take shortcuts. This is also why we don't ask people, what did you do? Like, when we're asking and learning about how the product is used in research, we watch them do it, not like, tell me what you did. The other one, we will sometimes ask people to describe their past experience, but instead of just asking, like, tell me about how you book flights online, people have this idealized, perfect model of how they book flights online, versus asking them, like, tell me about the last experience. And even that, like, knowing that that's biased, like, that question is better. Like, tell me about the last time is more specific. It's better than in general, and it's still not great, because they're gonna forget things, because it's like we can't remember everything that happens all the time. And so that's more just to say, it's like good to know that those biases exist, because it helps you explain the results from that. It also helps explain why certain designs do and don't work, and it's sort of like not your fault as a designer. It's like this is a human limitation that and we keep that in mind, like on the research team a lot. I think another one is mental models, which is related to some of this, like why we have this ideal model of how things work is because we have mental models of systems. I think that's a great one to learn about as a designer, because my favorite example of this is like my mental model of a house compared to my husband's mental model of a house. I grew up in Holland. It's the most densely populated country in the world. People live in like really tall houses, but they're all attached. I now, in Mountain View, I live less than a mile from here, live in the first freestanding house I've ever lived in. I can like walk around it, which is bonkers to me. And then it's only one story, which I think is like so crazy, like why not build up? And my husband grew up in Arizona, in Tucson, lots of space, and he's always lived in freestanding houses. And we lived in LA before this in a house with 2 stories. And he's like, stairs, why are these stairs in here? Like, why can't we all be on the same story? And so we have, based on our experiences and our past, like what we've experienced in life and the our view on the world, have a concept. So if you say house to me, I think of something really different than my husband thinks of, than probably a lot of you. Like if we went to New York City and asked people, like, what do you think a house is? Like, I wonder, like, people have different impressions, and knowing that we all have different mental models, why it's important to talk to people around the world, but is super important concept.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on that, because sometimes I've seen some new designers who come in and want to change things up and have a really great idea of making something completely different, a different experience. The struggle with that is it's so ingrained in these people's minds that it's really hard for them to understand that concept and to go break through search. Perfect example. Google is a verb. Like, there is a process to how you search. You all probably do it very similar, right? And if you try and change that, thinking that you could maybe do a different thing and be different and innovative and stand out, might not actually happen because that mental muscle is so ingrained and strong, and it's going to take a really long time. An example would be AI, like having an assistant talk to you, right? So I did some research where it was like, oh, well, we'll just have people talk into their phone and say what they want for search, as an example. And I'm like, great, okay, so what do you want them to do? And the designer would be like, I just want them to talk, and then the algorithms will figure out exactly what they want, we'll spit out an answer, and we'll have a dialogue, the phone and the user. And so when I had the users in the room, I would say, okay, just talk naturally, and what would you do if you had this? And they'd be like, California, tech jobs. And you're like, okay, is that how you would want this to work? Yeah. And they're like, okay, but if you were to do it naturally, what would that look like? California, tech jobs. And so it just wasn't working, right? Like their mind of what they thought they needed to do, because it's a phone and I'm talking and it's not a human. And the weird dynamic that came out of that is when it did respond in a human way, it actually made them stop and change how they would have normally behaved. And they were like, how do I stop talking to it? And I'd be like, why do you have a concern about that? You need to ask how to stop talking to it. Like, what is that about, right? Like, it was such an interesting, different dynamic that they had. They didn't even know how to stop it. So it's an interesting thing to think about. That mental muscle is super strong.
Mm.
I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, just to reinforce some of the things I've heard, it reminds me of things like, recognition over recall, right? So this has to do with our fallible memories. So if you can present the information in context, it's really good. So a lot of UI decisions that I make are around, does the user have the context to feel smart and confident about making the decision? An example would be you're deleting something. Rather than having a little window pop up that says, delete forever, with no context about what it is you're deleting, with delete forever or cancel, and they have to go back and remember what they were deleting, you can actually provide a little preview, have some text, something, so they can say, okay, I know exactly what I'm deleting, this is the thing. Another kind of, I don't know if necessarily it's a concept or more of just an observation, is that we live in a very distracted world, and designing with distractions in mind is something very important that I've kind of built into my workflow, is the imaginary happy path that people have nothing else in the world to do but take on this workflow with our product that we're building. They have exactly enough time, they're full of energy, they're super positive, they're confident, and they go along this nice happy path and get everything done, and it's amazing. Rarely happens. So thinking about how you can help people be successful and get through processes efficiently, even in the world of distractions that they're living in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are many very interesting concepts that can be applied. What are your experiences with B2B and B2C products and different concepts that work there? For example, what kind of concepts do you think might be especially useful in B2B or B2C environment?
The idea of distractions, I think, is really different. It's true in both cases, but looks really different and manifests really differently. If I think of designing a mobile experience that people on the go, and it's they literally could be anywhere. It's loud around, there's people, am I gonna talk into my phone if I'm in public? And then at work, there's the same kind of I'm in public feeling. People might not be able to hear the audio if you're going to play a video, or things not auto playing anything because they're at work, probably in an open workspace or cubicles, or there's that idea is the same. So idea of keeping distractions in mind is really important. It just looks really different. And what else, like how are people multitasking? Like at work, there's distractions from colleagues, from a chat, maybe email, meetings that like people come in and out. They're probably not completing the task like from A to B in one sitting. And so how are they using your product? Kind of also know what, like how if it's a productivity app, or like sort of like what's the point of your product, and that then looks different for a consumer, especially if you're like an entertainment product. You have a different goal in mind.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to add anything?
I can talk about, I think, a few more differences I see. But first, I think something that I have seen in the trend is that the line between like enterprise products and consumer products is blurring. A lot of this is because a couple things. One, users and teams are having more decision-making power about the tools that they use in many situations. And even when that's not the case, people are still becoming familiar with the types of experiences that they have on their consumer products, and they expect, the same level of thoughtfulness and design applied to enterprise experiences, even if they're not, super sexy workflows and things that they're doing. They want those experiences to meet the same bar. In terms of differences, I think device is one that I've seen quite significantly. Like typically on the enterprise products that I was building for users who were, whether or not they were in an office, they were in front of a computer. And so taking advantage of the screen size and the computing power and doing things there was much different than thinking about a consumer-facing product where, maybe 70, 80+% were coming in through mobile, and thinking about those differences. And there's one other difference, it might come back to me.
Yeah, and at LinkedIn, when I was on the sales solution product, I noticed there was a difference. And the difference was the struggle between, and I think it might be specific to LinkedIn, because the users that were on the enterprise products were using it for work, right? Like that was their day-to-day work tool. Totally different mindset from when they went to LinkedIn in the evening. And that's their personal LinkedIn tool. And that's maybe I didn't like my day job and now I want to find another one. And so as a product that has both, a user that has both sides of the product, that's a really interesting dynamic to think about. Like, at what point is it just a work product and what point is it a personal product, and how do those two worlds live? And it even, to take it up another level, who owns what? Like, if your company is providing a service on a tool, do you just use it for work? Can you use it for yourself? And there's an interesting dynamic there. So even thinking when you're designing about those possibilities of what does your users look like, and they could potentially be both sides of the house.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have one more question that is encouraged by Arjun. What about data and how you choose criteria and success criteria in designing or leading research?
The data.
And psychology of this, right?
I wish I had an amazing answer to this. We built a couple different frameworks for like thinking about success of our products, or like really I shouldn't say build new frameworks. We're like adapting different frameworks out there. One of the things that we've tried to do, and that I feel like I've now been able to do with the data science team, you don't have to be embedded with them, but is thinking about those business metrics and then like breaking it down into what are we trying to accomplish. One of the things that's really helped us tremendously is like our magic moment. I think for Facebook it's 7 friends in 10 days, or maybe it got that flipped. Like what is the key thing that people have to accomplish immediately that then like sets them up for success or indicates that they are now going to be an engaged, successful user. For us, on an account level, if an account hits 5 what we're calling moments of insight, it's like they've like watched a clip or a moment from a video in 30 days, they're set up for success. And so we got the whole company around this engagement and success metric, and that's helped a ton because that helps us collaborate across customer success and marketing and product to all be like grounded in the same metric, because renewals is such a lagging indicator. Like we can't wait a year to find out whether or not someone will renew. So having those engagement metrics and knowing like what behavior in the product relates to something that the business cares about. So we know that if a company hits on the user level, it's 12 weeks of watching. Like in 12 different weeks, we want people watching some part of a video, and there's all these indicators and behavior that we see that lead up to that. We can measure that. We can see how many engaged, successful users we have in the product, and we know that if we can get on an account people up to that engagement level, then that account is likely to renew, which has an impact on the business. And just that alignment has been incredible the past year.
Yeah, so that's actually a topic for research that's been hot right now at LinkedIn. Usually the UX research team isn't ever asked to be metrics driven, right? Like I talk to users, I talk to maybe 10 users, and that's the qualitative piece that I do. So it's all about the why, the meat on the bones. Why do they feel this way? Why are the numbers going in this direction? So it hasn't been a focus for us to focus on a metric. We're actually changing that now. And we're actually looking at NPS. So what is the NPS score for our particular, like for my particular part of the company? And really trying to dig in on those core metrics that the market research team is using to baseline where we stand against our competitors. And then I'm taking that into our research and really honing in on those 4 or 5 key core metrics that they're looking at and trying to get the whys. And the actual feedback that I could be like, here's a quote for this particular metric on why we're at this level versus this level. Here's what our users are saying today. And then 6 months from now, if I ask it again, I'll be like, okay, great. I'm hearing a little bit more about, like people are talking about their network a little bit more. So could be raising it up a little bit. So for us, really, we're just basing it on, can we take the metrics that the companies are using and start to really put the what behind those numbers for us.
Cool. I went through an exercise recently with the venture team. We actually are coming up with OKRs, which are outcomes and key results, which I think is a pretty effective way of thinking about success metrics, where you're focused on outcomes, whether it's for the business, whether it's for users. In my experience, the best outcomes are the ones where you're aligning. When the customers win, when your users win, then your business wins, so that you can invest and deliver even more value for the users. And shoot, I totally wanted to piggyback on something Nicole said.
I have something else to add, and then you can go back.
Okay, thanks.
I really like Google's Heart Framework, so that you can Google it. But it's a way to look at product health, or like really whatever you're looking at, and the middle letters for heart stand for engagement, adoption, retention, which is super like the just metrics heavy. Like how many people have ever used this? And you can do this at a feature level. So we do it at a feature level. You can do it at a whole product level. You can do it like on a page level if you wanted. But like how many people have used this feature? How often do they come back? Once they've used it, like do they stay? But then the H and the T for heart add the qualitative component, and it's been a really nice way for us also to sort of evangelize our team and benefit as of our data science and UX research team. So H stands for happiness and T for task success. It's hard to figure out what that means. We've toyed with NPS or some CSAT, customer satisfaction score. We also, for some teams, just look at feedback, like what is the feedback coming in? You could do support tickets on that. If there's a lot of support tickets, people are likely less happy. You could also use support tickets for task success. So can they accomplish it? I think for most, especially on the feature level, we've been pretty good at figuring out how do we know that people have successfully done it? Like we last year launched our live conversation product where you can just have interviews with people remotely. And so we look at, for task success, we look at what percentage of sessions that were scheduled actually happen. And that could be because like some sessions don't happen because the customer decides they don't need it anymore, because the tester doesn't show up, which is super frustrating, but happens. Maybe there were technical issues. It's a good indicator, like this was, like people could actually do the thing they came to do. and then different ways to measure happiness. But I like that as it just really inclusive framework. Yeah.
Could you also talk about the signals and I think a lot of people
Yeah.
Get confused about, the framework is fine, but the two columns, I forget the last one. Signals.
Yeah, and we've not been as diligent in like setting up. So it's sort of like once you have the framework and decide what I'm interpreting it as what's the definition. So we have really clear definitions of engagement, adoption, retention, happiness, task success for us. We've not been great at setting then the goals, like what is good. It's really hard to know, like especially at the feature level, like what is good engagement, what is good adoption. But you can measure engagement in different ways. You can measure you measure happiness in different ways. So it's being really clear on what that definition is for you, for your area, and then setting clear like targets for it. Like what is good, what is concerning. So in my ideal world, we have these beautiful heart dashboards for all the different product teams, and there's really clear sort of like yellow, green, red coloring. If it drops below a certain threshold, then we've not gotten there yet.
Yeah, so I just want to piggyback on baselines and setting baselines. That's something that I'm working on as kind of my 30% project this month, is getting some product satisfaction baseline scores so that we can see, each quarter as we're investing in different products and trying to move forward on these outcomes, that we're getting a signal in addition to seeing, different numbers and data, but we have that qualitative point. And then one other thing I wanted to mention was related to data, is that data can be a great source of asking questions and finding new project ideas of where to focus. So that's one of the big things at AngelList. We are, we're essentially this quarter is really kind of catching up and revamping, and the rest of the year is thinking about new things that we can do. So get comfortable either asking data yourself by checking out analytics or buddying up with a data scientist, because that's also a great starting point for design projects and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One quick question I had for the panel. If you have a new idea or new concept you're trying, as a guess, how many interviews or user research iterations does it take for you to really, you should plan for to make sure that this is a robust thing that you must develop or become the champion for?
Okay, I'm gonna let them take the interview side because I have a little bit different angle on it. So let's get the interview side first.
No, go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right, well, my side's a little different. So I would actually be thinking, the question I would think of is, what is the easiest or fastest way to test out like this assumption that I have? So I have this assumption that people are going to use this thing. Can I take 1 day or 2 days and create a prototype that I can get in front of people and watch them play around with, such that I can learn? There's a great article out from the makers of, I think the CEO or founder of Baremetrics released this thing about a project they just sunsetted. And there's some interest, it's a great article to check out. It's an interesting read about, we came up with this idea. He created a mock-up and kind of went around showing it to users. The feedback was great, like, oh yeah, this is gonna help me so much, I love it, great. Flash forward to more investment, building out the product, then asking people to pay for it. Zero people who said that they needed it and wanted this thing were paying for it, so they shut it down. And talking about that, so I think there's some interesting implications and kind of lessons for the interviewing or feedback side. I just wanted to kind of share that angle of what can we get in front of people to actually see them use it to better validate the impact that it's going to have.
Palm Pilot was a good example of that.
Yeah, it's actually not that different of an answer. We do interviews. We do a lot of concept. Like we start with discovery interviews, really broad, to kind of find out what people do today, kind of understand about their problem. If it's like maybe a new market, or we know that there's a workflow that we think we can sort of expand into and help solve a problem in, we will mock up like a concept of the product and ask for feedback on it, but we don't like fully decide to invest and build it out until we have a little bit more than just the like hunch from interviews. But sometimes even just a handful to like know that we're not crazy. Like I think we do a lot more discovery interviews than we do like concept validation. But then it's like, okay, we think we heard this problem, we think we understand that problem, here's kind of what we're thinking, but we, at the same time, as concept validation, will also do things like a mock landing page and get a sense of like the value people put on the product and whether or not the like fake dollar amounts that we put on there make sense. But we've also done things like a sort of lightweight version of a product and then ask the like product market fit question, like how would you feel if you could no longer use this product? We don't have a super like strict process for that.
Yeah, I don't think we have a super strict process either. I think it really depends on time, actually. Like, how much time do you have to explore something? Or are you on a really tight time frame and you have to like get to that concept stage right away? If you have unlimited amount of time, then you really can do that great foundational exploratory research where you're just like out finding your path. I have been at Belkin, I did a lot of that pre-work of like right before Nest came out, I was doing a project for Belkin where they were like, well, we're an accessory company for smartphones, so what can we make that would be great for an accessory piece that goes with your phone? So literally that's what I did. I went out into the wilderness and to people's homes across the US. I went to high-rise apartments in New York to rural, Midwest ranches. Everybody had an iPhone, right? So it's super easy to find the user. And ask them like, okay, you have this phone in your hand. What would you want it to do? It could be a magic wand and it can do almost anything, and have them literally take me around each part of their house and talk about what they would imagine hypothetically this could do. Now granted, if you can imagine if it's a new technology that nobody's ever thought of that you're kind of stepping into, getting a user to get there is not easy, right? They're gonna be like, that's the Jetsons, that's for rich people. They'll give you 900 excuses of why they're not gonna go there with you right now. And the way you get them to go there is by reminding them of the past. Do you remember when you had to walk up to the television and turn it on? Do you remember when you had to use your car key on your car to open the door? Now that meant you have to have a demographic that could kind of remember that or heard stories. Oh yeah, my mom talked about that. So you have to get them there, or, well, what if you were that person that had unlimited funds? How would you want to have this happen? So really trying to ask questions that get them out of that door where they're just like, no, that's not for me, because you don't know who your user is going to be. And to your point, how many? I think there is no magic number. When you know you're getting close is when you start hearing the answer over and over and over. And it's the same thing. It's the same pain point. And it doesn't matter if you're in New York or in St. Louis, it's the same pain that you're hearing. You're like, we're onto something. Or if it's someone who's renting or owning and they have the same feeling, great, perfect. And you'll start to notice that. It might take 5, 10, 15, you don't know. But once you start being like, oh my gosh, this is exactly the same interview I had yesterday, again, then you know you're onto something.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're slowly running out of time. So one last part, mindful design and basically how we could implement that kind of concept into the work of researchers, designers.
Okay. Yeah. So mindfulness from my standpoint is really thinking about helping users focus. So it's different strategies for thinking about, do we display this in a modal where we kind of laser focus and blur all the background distraction out? Do we have a wizard where we maybe break down a complicated process into steps so that they can focus one at a time? It has to do with aesthetics. Are you creating a calm space? Are there a lot of sharp corners? Is it very high contrast? So there are a lot of visual design decisions that go into creating a calm kind of focused space as well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've been thinking a lot more about mindfulness as a manager, as an employee. How do we create an environment at work where we can be mindful? Because that will show itself in our product. I don't think there's anything, we're not doing anything I'm aware of specifically to be mindful in our design other than mindful of our users. But I think that idea of just giving people the space at work and the space to think, the space to collaborate, and how do we sort of take our time when we need to take our time and not be so rushed and sort of going towards some goal without taking a moment to like step back and realize why we're doing this. Are we all on the same page about it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, especially when it comes to being overwhelmed with information, with like a visual, even part of the digital life, right? That we have too many stimulations, and basically keeping that in mind that people are all the time exposed to some different information, and helping them to just like have this smooth and calm experience, right?
Which is so funny because when I hear you say that, I'm thinking of like our product teams being so overwhelmed with so much information, like so much data, so many stakeholders, so many goals, so much else on their plate, like so much going on, so many bugs being filed, like there's so much happening. Like how can my team help provide the clarity in that? Like what is actually important? And one of the things we started doing is just making sure that whenever there's an opportunity to remind everyone of the user problem that we're solving, like why are we doing this, to not get lost in this like everyone has an opinion, everyone like wants something done. It's like, okay, let's go back and think back to why we're doing this. And so we start a lot of our presentations like every 2 weeks, and we had one today. We have a demo of the last 2 weeks and what happened, and a lot of those presentations, like before anyone, engineer, designer, product manager, researcher, anyone presents, we explain what the problem is that we're solving, like why are we doing this, and that grounding is really, really helpful.
And I would just add, don't feel like you have to be perfect. Like, I've done research where I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I don't get the right answer? What if my user is like mute, not telling me anything, and I'm trying to get an answer for my designers or the product people in the back. I know time is very crucial. So when you don't know who you're going to be speaking to as a user, and they come to you and you're like, okay, how am I going to make this work? You have 90 minutes with someone, and you've got a room full of people who want an answer because they got to build something. Just sit back and be like, tomorrow's another day. And there are times where like I might finish a project and be like, ooh, I know that wasn't perfect and not exactly answered what you wanted to answer, but there is a golden thing. Like you always learn something from a project, and there's always some learning that you could then do on another project. You can maybe ask a question again on the next thing that you're doing that's related to the last thing, and you can keep building. And software is a great thing because it can change like overnight. You could turn something off and turn it back on and change it. And so just keep an open mind that you don't have to have all the answers or the best design the first step out of the gate. And just if your team is aware of that and you're all on the same page, you just work through it, iterate.
Yeah. Okay. So if we were to give a certain advice to our audience, what is it? The one thing that they can start doing immediately to be more mindful about people, users that are on the other side of the product, what would that be?
I would just say, just think of who you're not serving when you're focusing on something, and just be aware of it. Just as long as everyone's aware of it, and that's a good step.
I'll say watch users, observe users.
Thank you.
It's super important because you're so close to the products that you're working on and thinking about. And you're seeing it in a very, sterile, unnatural environment most of the time. So being able to watch people use the product, you start to see things, but you start to expand your own perspective of what's normal and how people are tackling things. And when you do that, then you can start asking the questions why and getting into some of the more interesting research things too. So I'd say start watching people use your products.
Marika, one thing for you.
I was going to say the same thing as Adam. I'm glad he said it, so it wasn't the person from user testing telling you to go watch people use your products. I don't think I have anything else to add to that.
Okay. And what is the step that could move designers forward, like more in long-term perspective? Adam?
I think long term, it's really just like doing the work. I think that's something that people ask me quite a bit. Like, okay, you've been doing design for X number of years. Like, I'm just getting started, or I'm really interested in pursuing a career in design. Like, I want to do what you do. Awesome, that's great. One of the fantastic things about both research and design, all aspects of design, is that there's very low barrier to entry. Like, if you can find people, you can do work. So I would encourage people to like look for opportunities. Something like kind of small tip that I think can have long-term payoff is start to get into the habit of taking notes. Like when you see something, the next time you're frustrated, jot it down, take an audio note with your phone, somehow capture that, because these are all little seeds that you can use as things that you want to explore yourself, or maybe you can find similar situations at work that you're actually being able to think about these problems and issues.
I firmly believe as a researcher that everyone should do research and believe in democratization of research, even a little bit of democratization of design. I think both of them, the like skill and craft is really important. It's important to have people who can sort of like, they know high quality, but generally like there's a design process and there's like a flow of a product or a workflow that sort of anyone can map that and think about like what is the experience for users going to be. You don't have to be a designer. Anyone can talk to users. We're also really focused at work. Like we want user testing to be used by everyone, not just researchers. And that change and that shift, like who's responsible for what in the like building of products is changing and is super interesting. And sort of being adaptable and flexible to that is then going to be super important.
Great, thank you. There's one small thing. What would you like to recommend in terms of like books, sources, podcasts?
Yeah, there's a great UX Magazine article. I want to say it's by Susan Weinschenk, but maybe someone else wrote it based on her research and work. There's a spreadsheet of usability or psychology like principles and heuristics, and it's sort of a list of a lot of the things that we talked about of like people's limitations in attention and memory and visual perception, and like you can kind of use that spreadsheet as your checklist and like go through your designs and say like you could use that as like, I know Jacob Nielsen has usability heuristics, and so like you can kind of use it similar. You can also use it to explain like user behavior that you see, and I've used that list more for that. It's like, oh, we see people keep doing this thing, and I can explain why users are doing that thing based on like any of those line items in the spreadsheet, and that's a like much nicer conversation to have in a group where you're not putting blame on the design. I'm not recommending putting blame on the user. I'm putting blame on like the limitations of our brain and sort of like it feels like a nice distance to have that conversation of like, here's why people struggle with this design. It's not that you designed the form wrong, it's that the labels are too far away from the text field and people, like there's too much distance so they don't know what goes with each box. And so you can kind of explain why. So that spreadsheet's amazing. And then I also have to plug a Nielsen Norman Group conference and like a course. There's a Human Mind course by the Nielsen Norman Group that I used to teach that is fantastic. One day sort of like intro to psychology and the human mind.
Okay, I have a book that I want to share with you. And the reason I brought it is because I would not do justice to the author's name because her last name is really hard to pronounce. So I brought the book so you can just write it down. Technically Wrong. She came to speak at LinkedIn and I was blown away. I don't know if you've read it, but really makes you stop and think. So all the things I'm saying, like the unintended consequences and things like that, she's the one that put that in my head. Amazing. So it just really makes you stop and think of things in a different way. So I highly recommend this book.
Cool, I'm gonna get that one.
Yeah.
Susan Weinschenk, she is a psychologist. She's the brain lady on Twitter and other things, and she has a website that's really great. She has 2 books that I think are really fun, especially for people who are into psychology or want to geek out on that, but also for designers. It's 100 things every designer should know about people and 100 more things every designer should know about people. The 2 books, fantastic. And then there was one book that I discovered recently. I haven't made it through the book, but it's pretty awesome. It's called Mindful Design by Scott Riley. That's a pretty good one too. So I think for this topic, those are the books I'd recommend.
Great, thank you. We will put links to those books and sources for you guys later. Okay, thank you very much. Stay with us for the next part and questions and answers. And you guys are very welcome to approach our guests and basically, ask your personal questions, get to know each other a little bit as well, and check out who else is in this room and what brings other people here. And thank you very much.